Welcome, Jeff fans. It's Victory Monday. We don't get many of these throughout the season, so let's take these when we can take advantage of them, and let's enjoy them a little bit. Obviously, we all understand the victory yesterday doesn't do well from a draft pick perspective, but when you look at the overall landscape of what this victory did for us overall, um, dropped us from 7 to 8. A loss would have brought us from 7 to 6. Those two draft spots aren't going to make a significant difference. Fighting over draft capital is an argument that we can do year in and year out, but at the end of the day, the real victory or not non-victory is going to be with whoever is making the picks. Head coach GM combination. Jets have to hit on that first and foremost, and we all understand that. We all know that. And looking at the landscape of the top 6 picks, the teams picking ahead of us, you have the Giants and Raiders, who probably aren't going to win another game. I think the Raiders have an opportunity today to get a victory, and after that, you got Jacksonville, Tennessee, teams that for all intents and purposes, are going to lose out for the most part, except for Jacksonville and Tennessee when they play each other at the end of the season. And we saw the result of the first appearance from those two teams. Mac Jones was able to beat Tennessee in that game. So I mean, at the end of the day, we're fighting over marbles here. Patriots are not losing another game this season. They play the Patriots twice, and then I forget the game they have in the middle of that. But again, another game that they should not win. I know when we were talking about in the AFC Shakedown show over the weekend, the Patriots aren't winning another game. They're going to lose out. The Giants are going to lose out. They're just terrible. The Raiders, depending on what they do today, will probably lose out. It's just the Jets were never going to find themselves in the top 2. And when you're rooting for a tank, when you're rooting to lose out, whatever the case may be, you're doing it because you want one of the quarterbacks. And outside of Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, there's not that elite prospect that I'm saying shoot up to number 3 to go get that guy. And that would just, like I said, wasn't going to happen. I could be wrong. Giants could surprise us all and get a victory somewhere down the line. Raiders can, get a victory today and maybe get another victory somewhere down the road against Jacksonville. I know that there's a game there. But really, when we look at this, like I said, at the end of the day, the Jets weren't going to get to one of those top 2 spots. There's too many teams ahead of us that are going to be searching for quarterbacks as well. Tennessee being one of those. Um, Patriots, although they're not looking for a quarterback, would have been more than thrilled to trade out of that spot, especially if they're picking a spot ahead of the Jets, which they were going to. Like I said, they're not going to win another game. So again, let's root for wins. Let's just see what the hell happens. Draft position, be what it may. Yesterday was a fun day. It was fun to watch this team win. Yes, they played against the crappy Jaguars. I understand that. The Jaguars are awful. They were picking first up until their victory last week against the Titans. We all understand it's Mac Jones. But with all that being said, this is a team that's been awful on offense for years, and to see them put up a performance like they did yesterday, Aaron Rodgers with almost another 300-yard game, Devontae Adams almost 200 yards receiving. This is offense. This is high-powered offensive ability that we haven't seen from this team. We've been rooting for it for a long time, and I'm not going to sit here and say we should have lost or whatever have you. If you're a fan rooting for losses, fine. That you have every right to root for this team however you want. I understand the benefit of a loss here. I wasn't going to be up in arms about a loss here. It would have been, disgusting for us to lose to a team like Jacksonville. But again, I understand the implications of potentially climbing up the draft boards when you're a team that is looking for a quarterback. And there's every single year there's a quarterback that no one has really ever heard of, or not that we haven't heard of, but didn't really expect to climb up draft boards. And that guy, in my eyes, was going to be Drew Aller out of Penn State. He decided to stay back another season. The news just came out about half an hour ago, I think is when I saw the report. Drew Aller would have been a guy that I would have been all for this team taking, giving him a year behind a bridge quarterback, whether that be Tyrod Taylor. Does Aaron Rodgers come back? All those questions obviously are going to come over the next couple of months. Um, Aller would have been a guy that I would have been all for sitting a year. He has some skills that I've been actually really excited about since watching him play in September. The first game I really saw out of him, he just looked like he had something, and that it wasn't a guy that I you know really understood at the time, really kind of knew of before that game, and he just the ball kind of pops out of his hand. He's accurate, 70% accuracy. I know a lot of Jet fans kind of look at the Penn State quarterback situation and immediately get PTSD with the Hackenberg. He's not Hackenberg. Hackenberg came out of college with accuracy problems. And Drew Aller has 70% accuracy, like I said, on the season. Hackenberg, I think his final season dropped his completion percentage down to about 52, 53%. So it was definitely going to be a situation where the Jets had to adapt. With all that being said, we're not we're not going to be in a position, obviously, to pick Aller because he won't be coming out. And I think that with Jets find themselves in a situation here, picking somewhere between, I would say, picks 5 and 10 after it's all said and done. Because you look at the rest of the schedule, you got Buffalo, you got the Rams this week, you got Miami to wrap up the season. Jets probably end up winning one more game if they can against the Dolphins. Maybe they shock us with a victory against the Rams or Buffalo. I doubt that's going to be the case. But the real logical situation here, and kind of where I said it for the past few weeks, I see the Jets winning two more games. Um, and this is obviously before the Dolphins game, or sorry, before the Jacksonville game. Saw them winning two more games. They had an opportunity against the Seahawks. They had an opportunity against the Dolphins. Obviously, they get the victory yesterday. So the wins are possible. I mean, if you're pro tank, those first few games against Seattle and Dolphins, you're kind of happy with the result. That the Jets weren't able to kind of finish the game off. Defense let them down as they have for a majority of the season, especially the way that this offense has played over the last few weeks. It's kind of understated a little bit how Aaron Rodgers has kind of moved the needle a little bit, kind of more in the direction. I mean, if you asked me this question before the Seattle game, I would have told you I was about 80%, 90% sure Rodgers was going to be leaving after the season, whether it be via trade, release, whatever the case may be. After this last couple of games, I would say I'm probably a little bit more. I still think at the end of the day he ends up leaving the franchise and again going somewhere else or retiring, one or the other. I still think that's probably the most accurate kind of expectation for Rodgers, but based on his play the last few weeks and the fact that the Jets aren't slotted somewhere in the top of the draft to pick one of those two quarterbacks, I think it makes sense for Rodgers to be here next season while the Jets still kind of grab take a look and see what they can do at the quarterback position. I would say I'm probably at 60-40. Like I said, I'm still kind of leaning on him not being here. But if he has a strong stretch over the next 3 games, obviously that can trend more in that direction. And at the end of the day, too, it really comes down to who the Jets bring in to be the head coach. If it's a guy that's kind of a hotshot offensive coordinator type of thing, that probably want to move in their own direction, away from Rodgers, bring in a quarterback of their own, and kind of mold them in a certain way, whether it be like a veteran free agent or maybe they do take a shot at one of these second tier kind of quarterbacks. You got Milrow up there as a possible option. I'm not crazy about Quinn Ewers, but you got to kind of start throwing names in the bucket. There's going to be someone that we're not expecting that's going to slip their way up into the first round, and the Jets are picking high up there. So that's where I don't really see the situation where the Jets would be in a position to draft one of those guys. But nonetheless, it's just something you got to consider here. But we'll go into the positives here, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the kind of bonehead type of situations here um, from this Jets team that kind of get you shaking your head. Rodgers again, strong performance, 289 yards passing. He had 3 touchdowns on the day. Garrett Wilson, 3 catches, 56 yards. He had 2 catches on that very first drive, including that touchdown reception. Jets didn't really go after him after that. He had 1 catch. I think I want to say it was on the first drive of the second half, and then it was really nothing after that. But Adams had a monster game, 9 catches, 198 yards, 2 touchdowns on the day, including his 100th career touchdown, and also his 101st after that second touchdown. How did he was in position to really score on that last play as well. Made a nice move, ended up getting us to the 1 yard line. Um, kind of a nice sequence of events there. Caught a short pass and just kind of ran with it. There was nobody near him for a long period of time until he got close to the goal line. And obviously all the defenders kind of, merged onto him. But Devontae, big game. Um, when you look at this, yeah, I see. Appreciate it, Veterans Gaming Podcast. I appreciate you joining the chat. Preference on Brian Flores. He'll be looking for a redemption in Miami situation. I do like Brian Flores. I do like him. I liked what he did in Miami. His one season there, or his couple seasons there. They were a tank team. They were tanking for two of that first season when he was there. But they still showed fight, even though they were, ended up slotting. I think fifth overall, sixth. I think it was fifth overall. Is where they drafted Tua. Um, but he had that team trending in the right direction from a, when you look at the team football wise, they were a strong team. He was doing a good job there. I think what did him in was his relationship probably with the front office and the lack of ability to find a strong offensive coordinator. I spoke a little bit with Curtis on our AFC Shakedown podcast, which is on every Saturday at 4 o'clock. For any of you interested in hearing some kind of AFC's banter week in and week out, we have a fun time over there. But he kind of thinks that whole relationship with the offensive coordinators is kind of overblown. They had Gailey there, Chan Gailey, former Jets offensive coordinator as well, during the Ryan Fitzpatrick year. They had him there as well, and they kind of forced him out a little bit, is kind of my understanding. And Brian Flores couldn't figure out an offensive coordinator after that. That's my biggest concern with a guy like Brian Flores is if you're getting a defensive minded guy, and we've done that over, you know, except for Adam Gase, we've done it pretty much every hiring cycle over the last 26, 27 years. If you get a guy like Brian Flores, you have to understand on the offense side of the ball, you're going to have a step down. He's going to have to come in with somebody who's a strong offensive mind. My biggest thing on an offensive coordinator type of hire with a guy like Brian Flores, I would like to see somebody who maybe doesn't make it out of this next hiring cycle. With a job. Um, I'm not sure who you look at that's potentially getting fired that would take an offensive coordinator position a step down. But like if we got Zach Taylor gets fired, he probably gets a job somewhere else, is my opinion. But if he doesn't get a job somewhere else, that would be an interesting one to bring in. Somebody who's had success running offenses or developing offensive players would really be my strong, kind of push there. Is Brian Flores going to want somebody who maybe has a little bit of power? Um, I mean, that's the thing you always got to understand with these coaches. They don't want somebody who's going to kind of reclaim power over them. But you almost would want a situation like the Jets tried to do with Adam Gase. I see a veteran. Let me see your other comment here. Jets have had too many player-friendly coaches. They need a strong, yeah, and that's part of the reason why I like a guy like Flores. I like a guy like um, Mike Vrabel. I like that kind of disciplinarian, real tone at the top type of guy to run the franchise. That's something I'm highly in favor of for this team doing. Um, but again, my biggest concern is if you get a defensive minded guy, who is his offensive coordinator going to be? Um, you know, when you look at a guy like Mike Vrabel, he kind of struggled on the offense side of the ball. He had guys like Downing, who was there as well. The offensive line coach, Keith Carter. I mean, his whole staff there on the offense side of the ball wasn't one to be kind of overly thrilled about. Flores, again, I like Flores a lot. I just want to know, is he going to come in with a guy who knows what he's doing on the offense side of the ball, or is he going to come in with somebody maybe, kind of on the lower ranks on the offense side of the ball? If you get one of those hot, like kind of up and coming offensive guys too, and not that this is a problem because it means that your offense is doing something right, then you find yourself in a situation maybe in a year or two down the road where that offensive coordinator is getting plucked to be a head coach somewhere else. Again, that's a good problem to have, but it's a problem that could it's a problem that's good in the moment that could result in potentially down the road searching for another offensive coordinator again. And we know how that game of roulette, Russian roulette with the offensive coordinators can go. We've had struggles as a team with defensive minded coaches bringing in solid offensive guys. again, I'm huge for Brian Flores. That's one of the guys that I would put close to the top of my list. Um, but yeah, I just overall think that it would be more beneficial for us to lean on the offensive side of the ball. But the Jets do need somebody who's going to come in and be that alpha male at the top. I mean, you look at what Denver did with Sean Payton, um, a guy with years and years of pedigree, offensive minded guy came in there and has turned that franchise around. Um, and he's an offensive minded guy. The Jets, obviously there's not Sean Payton's run around every offseason. Um, but yeah, it would be something very interesting to see what the Jets do here from the head coach spot. Supposedly they're going to take this as long-winded here. They're already starting GM and head coaching interviews here next week. I think they're going to interview. I forget the timing of it exactly, but former Titans GM John Robinson. Which the concern there about that hire is Vrabel kind of left because he had a bad relationship with that GM. Does that mean the Jets are kind of leaning away from Vrabel? Does it have anything to do with it? I mean, anything's possible. But yeah, Robinson getting the first crack at a GM interview, and then um, Reddick, the ESPN analyst, former scout, has been in front offices before, and say what you want about his takes, and he's a little aggressive with his takes against the Jets, and I understand a lot of Jet fans don't appreciate that. But listen, he obviously sees a lot of the problems that the Jets have. I don't mind a guy like that. He's kind of respected in national media, which I think is something the Jets could really use a little respect from the national media. Maybe that kind of turns these vibes around a little bit. Again, I'm not kind of saying that he is the great hire, but I mean, out of the two names so far, he's the one out there I'd be interested in. And it's going to get a little more intensive. I think you're hearing names right now because the Jets can only interview um, you know, they can only interview people that aren't currently employed by another team until they get grant or given permission from other teams to be able to interview guys. That usually happens in the playoffs. You can usually interview. I forget exactly how it works, but I think that first week of the playoffs, you can interview someone if they're not playing that week. So you look at a team like Kansas City and potentially the Lions, who are currently slotted as the one seeds in their respective conferences. Look at the Eagles too. If they kind of jump ahead of the Lions for that one seed, that'll be like your first wave of candidates that you could potentially interview. Then after that, it depends on which teams get knocked out of the first round, second round, so on and so forth. So it gets a little tricky plotting out these interviews. But what I do like is the Jets getting ahead of this game a little bit, getting that first run of interviews. They may not be people you want at all. Like I kind of thought that they'd kind of kick the tires on Vrabel at this point, and maybe that is still something that they can do over the next couple of weeks before the season comes to a close. I thought that they would at least kind of get him in the building, hear what he has to say, so on and so forth. But this is a brand new cycle. They just hired their team a couple weeks ago. Probably kind of accumulated that list of candidates that would potentially be interviewed, and then kind of work their way through eventually into where we're at now, where we're actually starting to kind of list out some interviews and start getting some of these guys on the schedule. That's where the Jets are. They're really early into this process, and there's really no rush. I mean, you're not going to interview, you know, 20 non-hired candidates at this point in time. So, veteran, I see you again. I appreciate you in the chat. No, the Jets, if they win out, they'll give Jeff. Oh my God, no! I think the writing is on the wall with Ulbrich. And I would say, knowing the Jets, yeah, that would be something that they would do. But luckily for us in this situation, Jeff Ulbrich isn't winning out against teams like the Rams, Bills, and Dolphins. Maybe he wins that Dolphins game, but I just can't see. But yeah, that would be a total Jets thing to do. Um, go into that last game against Miami and have that Rex Ryan party where Woody Johnson comes down in the locker room before the game starts and Ulbrich will be here next year and have a whole party about it. But yeah, no, no 5-year extension for Ulbrich. I think the writing is on the wall with him to be out after the season. I think this defense is taking such a step back. There was a point in time where I'd said, he might be back, um, depending on the head coach hire as defense coordinator. I think this defense taking such a step back that he's kind of out in that aspect as well. Um, he'll get a job somewhere else. I think maybe a team hires him as defense coordinator based on his, what he's done over the last couple of years. Um, but I don't think, yeah, I don't think he has a future with the Jets after the season, after the way the season has gone. And it's not his fault. He was put in over his head. Um, this wasn't a situation conducive to a first time defensive coordinator to come in and be the head coach and call the defensive shots. I said it on, again, going back to our AFC Shakedown podcast. The ideal situation, one, would have been demote Hackett and give Salah a couple of weeks with Downing calling the plays, seeing if that change in OC caused enough of a shakeup to turn this thing around. Option two, if you were going to fire Salah the way they did, promote Ulbrich to be the head coach, and then promote White Cotton to be the defensive coordinator, or Odin. I like Tony Odin as well, defensive backs coach. That would have been the ideal situation. They really set up Ulbrich to fail in this situation where they promoted him to head coach and said, "Hey, still call the defensive plays." It's a lot on your plate to be a head coach in the NFL. It's a lot on anyone's plate to really take that position and call plays or whatever it may be. Um, it wasn't a favorable situation for Ulbrich, and unfortunately, the Jets kind of our understanding, are getting a taste of that right now. But veteran, keep 'em coming. You're keeping this chat kind of exciting here a little bit. Keep the questions coming. I appreciate you in the chat. So yeah, we'll kind of proceed here. Yeah, so the offense looked solid. There was a period of time where it just didn't look like it was doing enough, but over the course of the game, it was moving the ball. It was doing what it needed to do. Early in the game, just wasn't enough. Second half, things kind of exploded. But one part of this Jets team that kind of stayed consistent throughout the entire course of the game, and I got to give this position group a lot of praise here. The entire offensive line is just this is by far one of the best offensive lines we've seen in quite some time. The Jets have struggled on the offensive line for years and years and years, and finally we have some semblance of something you can look at and say there's something there. There's something to build on. And the fact that four of these guys are on the roster next season, the four of those being Fashanu, obviously, Simpson, Titman, and AVT. If I'm the Jets, I'm making Moses one of my top priorities to bring back. I think you can get him at a team friendly contract. Whether or not he's taking that team friendly contract, it seems like he enjoys being here, and he's a good leader. I mean, he fights through injuries. He plays banged up, and banged up Moses is better than what we have to offer at the moment. This is the offensive line that I would like to see in 2025, and maybe even further than that too. You can look in the draft for a right tackle in the second or third round for someone who can eventually take Moses' spot down the road. But I like this group. This group has been, it's been powerful. It's been strong. I think the Jets have kind of nailed the offensive line this offseason. Now, that was something that Joe Douglas was brought in here to do from day one. Finally took him, until year 5, year 6, whatever it was, for him to finally get that under control. But by then, unfortunately, it was too little, too late. Part of the issue too is the Tyron Smith situation. Fashion has been outstanding. He's been outstanding there. My biggest concern is the Jets see him at practice all the time. They saw Tyron Smith struggling, and I understand Tyron Smith took a major step down, kind of equate it to maybe it took him a little time to kind of get, but at some point in time, you're seeing how Fashanu is playing or is practicing. There must have been something there where you say, okay, we understand Tyron Smith struggling. Let's put Fashanu in. Eventually, they did it. Obviously, I mean, he's playing now, and they have Tyron Smith injured and probably won't play another down. Obviously, because some of those contract escalators based on playing time. But this offensive line is, you know, one of the best we've seen in a very, very long time. AVT's health is a major concern, obviously. Last couple of seasons and even this year played banged up a little bit, but he's kind of got himself under control here. And they were kind of freak injuries too. Um, I think it was his Achilles last year, if I remember right, and the year before a torn tricep. The guy just can't play in Denver. If we play Denver next year and we're playing in Denver, AVT stay home, get some rest. Don't play in that game. For whatever reason, we go to Denver, this guy gets injured. So it's kind of a scary situation there. But this season, he's been solid. The area of concern for the offensive line, and it's been a common issue, and I think it has more to do maybe with the play call, the play design, so on and so forth. The running game week in and week out is just not good enough. It's a major concern. I think a large part of it, like I said, is the play design for those running situations. I think another huge part of it is the fact that we don't have a single tight end that can block efficiently. And it's such a weird situation. Jeremy Ruckert, in his rookie year, I remember he came in later in the season. There was a couple of games where he put on a little bit of a blocking clinic in the run game, and I thought he had a future with us from a run blocking perspective. But something has happened over the last couple of years, probably the offensive line coach that needs to be gone at the end of the season. Just hasn't developed his run blocking enough. And I think that's a huge thing. The good teams that know how to run the football have good blocking tight ends that can run block as well. When you get those perimeter runs, you need someone at tight end position who kind of be that kind of initial seal block, pull blocker. If you're going the other side of the line, the Jets don't have that, and I think that's a big piece of why the Jets struggle in the run. Because when you look at this offensive line piece by piece, they're doing a good job in the run game. It's just not enough push. Interior is probably where they get some success um, when they're able to when they're able to dial up a good run play. It looks like it has the ability to work. And I think part of it too. I love Brees Hall, but I think he's looking for the big play way too frequently instead of taking what defense gives him, and just cutting a field. Even a 3 or 4 yard gain is a productive run, especially in early downs. I think he's looking to be a game breaker, and I think a big part of that is the way this offensive line has been, or the way that this run blocking has been all season long. If he doesn't get that big run, he's probably not going to get many other opportunities, and that's kind of the way it's been. Is the Jets don't get enough run yards, and then they kind of just fall back and kind of go into that one-dimensional phase where they're passing it seems like every down. It's just not good enough. When you look at this game, when you have Aaron Rodgers and Ashton Davis getting more rushing yards than your running backs, um, something's not going right. And credit to Rodgers, credit to Ashton Davis. Davis had that fake punt that he ran for 21 yards. Aaron Rodgers was able to squeeze out a few first downs for 45 yards rushing. Um, obviously big running games there, but Brees Hall, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis just not getting enough push in true run situations, enough to do enough in this game. But at the end of the day, the passing attack was working, and that's where I thought the Jets should have attacked Jacksonville. Jacksonville's secondary has just been awful for most of the season, and the Jets were able to take advantage of that. Um, a lot of praise for the offense. They had a good game. Again, it was against the Jaguars. I understand, not a game that we really expected to lose or should have lost. But I'll give them one notch of negativity, and this is just me being picky. Um, that last situation, that clock management, towards the end of the game, you have the ability in this situation, and this kind of 2 weeks in a row, a very similar kind of situation. Last week, it was the throw on the sideline to Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams made the catch. Instead of falling to the ground, kind of got pushed out of bounds. Obviously we talked about Devontae Adams kind of said the ref should have blown the whistle. He was fighting to get down for a few seconds and eventually got pushed out of bounds, stopping the clock. We'll understand the result in that game. They left the Dolphins with like 52 seconds. Dolphins had plenty of time to get in the field goal range, tie it, and eventually win it overtime. This game was a similar situation. The Jets had the ball inside the 1 yard line after that long Devontae Adams catch and run where he kind of stretched, try and get into the end zone. You had the ball with about 50 seconds. I think it was like 55 seconds, if I remember right. 55 seconds. Jacksonville had 2 timeouts left. In that situation, the Jets can kneel it 3 times realistically. Um, the Jaguars would waste 2 timeouts. That third down, with the kneel down, you're able to bring that clock down to about 55 seconds, take 40 seconds off that clock, getting it down to about 10 or 15 seconds roughly, is where you would eventually get that. Kick the field goal, win the game. Um, it was Mac Jones on the other side of the field, I understand, but Mac Jones all day long was kind of sustaining long drives. I know you don't expect him to go down the field, win the football game, hence why he's a backup quarterback now. But you also just don't want to put someone in position to do that. They did it the week before to a good quarterback in Tua, and he made his pay. Next few weeks, they're going up against 3 quarterbacks that can do that. You can't put yourself in that position. It's just unacceptable. That's a situation where, as a head coach, which Jeff Ulbrich has been assigned that role, whether you like it or not. He just has to be better. He needs to make sure his team understands that you need to just down the ball. Better than I got you again here. Kicker Carlson missed a field goal earlier in the game, so I understand why the Jets didn't want it. Yeah, so I understand that too. The concern there in that aspect. That well, first off, they're at the 1 yard line, so the field goal is roughly a 20-yard field goal. Um, you center it on third down, and again, kickers miss field goals all the time. Kickers miss weird field goals all the time. I understand the concern there for sure, but at least in that situation, first and second down, kneel it. At least make Jaguars waste their timeouts. And on third down, if you want to try and score a touchdown, you score the touchdown, and Jaguars are left with the same amount of time, but no timeouts. The fact that you did it on first down, giving them both their timeouts, still 50 seconds to play, that's probably more of the alarming part of the situation. So I understand punching it in if you're really desperate to get in the end zone just to make sure you get the points. But on first down wasn't the situation. Um, and then, like I said, you get stopped on third down, whatever. Then you're in a situation where you got to kick a 20-yard field goal to win the game. Um, so yeah, no, I definitely do understand the missed field goal. But other than that, Carlson's been pretty automatic since he's been here the last few weeks. Um, it was a weird missed field goal. I understand that. Should have made it. It was a 48-yard field goal I think he missed. Um, Not acceptable to miss that. I understand, but um, you know, you would hope an NFL kicker can redeem himself by making a 20-yard field goal to win the game. It's kind of my hope there. But I definitely do understand. That was kind of my thought process a little bit in that situation. Is let's get the ball in the end zone, but also taking the benefit of eventually at least let Jacksonville use their timeouts is probably the best decision that they could have done there. But at the end of the day, didn't matter. Jets were able to get the win, but do that shit against Josh Allen, do that against Matthew Stafford, do it against Tua again. You're probably going to regret that decision down the road if you make that same choice. Just these little things that winning teams do that the Jets need to eventually get themselves to doing would be nice. So we went a lot of positive, obviously on the offense side of the ball. And I guess I'll start with the positives on the defensive side of the ball. There's not really much to say. I'll just be outright. The defense has just been awful once again. 400 yards allowed to a Mac Jones led offense. Can't do that. I mean, I don't understand. But the one area I would say, where they did crack down a little bit is once Jacksonville got into the red zone area, the Jets were able to kind of control it. They did allow 2 touchdowns. The 2 touchdowns to Brian Thomas, who I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. The last few weeks, you've found Chuck Clark covering receivers, tight ends, and I just don't think that's his A game. to say the least. I think that that's something that, especially not a guy like Brian Thomas, who's I don't know, I really like Brian Thomas as a receiver, but nonetheless, Chuck Clark shouldn't be covering another team's number one receiver. Um, I know the Jets are stubborn. I know they run that weird kind of zone man type of situation where, Sauce Gardner has his half of the field and whoever's on the other side. Obviously, not DJ Reed this week. We had Stickers on the opposite side this week, covers their side, and everything else kind of works its way out in the middle between the linebackers and safeties. That's a problem there. You have Sauce Gardner, who did a good job on Brian Thomas when he was covering him. There weren't a lot of opportunities, but when he had pretty good coverage. A couple of holding penalties, obviously a concern for Sauce Gardner over the past season. But nonetheless, the defense allowed 400 yards to Mac Jones. Um, Mac Jones also able to run the ball well. It's a weird situation. If you had told me whatever the over was on Mac Jones and Aaron Rodgers getting rushing yards, it's kind of impressive that both those guys were able to kind of run the ball efficiently in this game. Go back to Veteran again. He's all over the chat, and I appreciate it for sure, man. Sauce Gardner's on Jets next year. Is it make or break for him after 3 seasons? Rivas had 14 picks. Sauce at almost 3 seasons has 2. Oh. Yeah. So yeah, Sauce Gardner's been struggling with the picks for sure. It's a concern there, for sure. But what I will say is the guy is still pretty locked down on the outside for the most part. Early in the season, I think it was a little worse than we all would have liked. For candidate next year is, I wouldn't say a make or break season, but he's not. If he has another season like this year, he's probably not going to get that top corner money like we kind of expected after last season. If you would have had another season like last year, this season he's probably due for a big payday this off season. But I think I wouldn't expect that he would come in here and ask for that extension after a down season. He's probably gonna try and rebound next year to get that big payday after year 4. Is my kind of understanding. Here's the deal with Sauce. I mean, he's under contract next year. Is his 4th season. The Jets likely pick up his option for year 5. Is my thought there as well. So I mean, he still technically has 2 years to really kind of decide whether or not he's here long term. I don't know if he takes the route of a holdout type of situation to try and get that extension. I don't know. We have a little bit of time to worry about that type of situation. Realistically, it could start after the season, but I think with a new regime, they're going to come in and they're not going to kind of look to be paying players right away. A guy that has earned a pay raise would be Garrett Wilson, and I think that whoever this new staff is, it would behoove them to really kind of get this fan base kind of on board with the fact that they are willing to kind of look at the long-term solution here. Garrett Wilson is 100% part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I would love it if the Jets are able to kind of prioritize and give Garrett Wilson a much due extension. But I also do understand on the flip side, you have that potential, you know, Sauce Gardner. I don't think he's gonna be jealous by any means. He's coming back anyway. I assume you're talking about Sauce, whether or not he's going to be here or not. Yeah, I mean, Sauce is going to be here for the next 2 years. I mean, there's no major issues there. He's under contract. I don't think the Jets are looking to trade him, especially not after a potential quote unquote down year. In many people's eyes, he's still been outstanding in coverage. He's still one of the top cornerbacks in the league. His tackling is an issue, but if you do your job, you're covering guys down the field. Defense coordinators have to kind of understand players' strengths and weaknesses, and if a guy's not strong on tackling, apply a little extra kind of on that side of the field. Try and limit the opportunity for another team to expose a player like that and his poor tackling ability. And I think if you're Sauce Gardner, take this as a learning opportunity. I think he was so outstanding his first couple of seasons in coverage that he just kind of refined and continued to work on his strength. And then the poor tackling is when you're someone who gets kind of called out for poor tackling, it's one of those things that kind of sticks with you, and you really can't teach tackling in October, November, which is where these major problems really kind of started spiking. He's always been outstanding in coverage. These weren't an issue that we had experienced the first couple of years, but now that has reared its ugly head. Teams are kind of exposing him in that aspect. It does seem to be a little bit more of an issue, but I would say even like if you look at the last few weeks, he's kind of worked on that a little bit. I mean, he only has one missed tackle, I believe, over the last 5 games. His last 5 games, I know he missed last week, so I would say tackling has gotten better, but there's it's still not where it needs to be. Um, so there is to work on. But yeah, defense is awful once again. Like I mentioned, 400 yards allowed. They held the Jaguars in the red zone to 4 field goals. They did punch it in 2 times as well on touchdown. So yeah, those are situations where I think if you just kind of have a defense coordinator who can kind of map up and kind of draw up some good defensive plays, that maybe those aren't situations where you would expect the guy to score. Um, there was no situation where Brian Thomas should be covered by Chuck Clark, and I think that's the biggest problem in this game. And then you just look over at the positives here. Jalen Mills on the first interception did a fantastic job of tracking the football as it was going deep, kind of reel it in. Credit to him. He's been outstanding as a safety. I do like what we're seeing out of Jalen Mills. Um, the Jets just as a collective group, that defensive line has taken such a major step back that I think the secondary is just kind of being overly exposed. I think it is better than maybe it appears, but when you have a poor defensive line that is applying no pressure, Hassan Reddick has just been awful since he's been here. I looked at his stats before this, and I forget what they were off the top of my head, but I know he has a half a sack and I think like 9 combined tackles since being here, and I think he started like 6 or 7 games, I think 6 games to this point. That the fact that we got rid of John Franklin Myers, brought this guy in, and also paid the guy is just the most despicable thing this team could have done. You know, JFM was a true leader in this locker room. He was a strong defensive lineman, set the edge in the run, was able to pop inside in passing situations. You can't replace somebody who does so many good things, so many things well, and that's what he was. The fact that we traded him for absolutely nothing, he ended up signing a 2-year, $14 million contract. I mean, you could have had JFM here for the price of Hassan Reddick for 1 season. And the fact that the Jets kind of didn't identify the worth of John Franklin Myers to this roster, I think is a major reason why a lot of these guys have been fired to this point. Because that defensive line has been awful. It's taken a major step back, and I think he's a big reason for it. The Jets replaced him with Javon Kinlaw at $10 million for this 1 year, and Hassan Reddick $15 million for his 1 year. So $25 million for a guy for 2 guys that are producing far worse than a guy that you could have had for almost half the price. Uh, just poor GM play right there. There's other ways to go, and unfortunately, what happens is your defensive line takes a step back, and now your secondary is being forced to cover longer. We all understand the math of football and how this whole thing works, but yeah, I mean this secondary is being forced to cover for a lot longer than they're used to. And when you're covering a guy for 4 or 5 seconds, you can be the greatest corner in the league. It's tough. Yeah, that guy's gonna wiggle free at some point in time, um, and you're gonna look bad in the stat sheet. Um, but the Jets have a good collective group of players in the secondary. DJ Reed, Sauce Gardner, obviously Michael Carter. Although Michael Carter is not you know, he's been battling through injuries. I think that's a big part of the reason why he's had his struggles. Speaking of, I mentioned earlier the AFC Shakedown, which is on every Saturday at 4 o'clock. My man Mafia Sports Report, Tommy, he's in the chat. Appreciate him joining. Appreciate the support. A lot of positives, Tommy. We're the Jets win a game, albeit against a poor team. Um, Yeah, and Tommy was all on it. He picked the Jets. Most of us did. The only one that didn't pick the Jets was Curtis. So we'll have some fun this Saturday, poking at Curtis, especially after his Dolphins took a defeat 20-12. I did have that game pretty close, by the way. I did mention the Dolphins would be held to 17 points. They ended up being held to 12 points. So Curtis was quick to kind of say that there's no way that Houston was going to stop us and hold us to 17 points. Well, kind of held them to a little bit more than that. So I was wrong there. Yeah, Tommy's hitting it on the nose here. Mac Jones looking like Lamar. I actually mentioned it. It's a pretty funny stat line for the Jets in this game. The fact that Mac Jones and Aaron Rodgers had pretty significant rushing games. Rodgers 45 yards rushing led the Jets, which is not good when when you have Brees Hall in the backfield and Isaiah Davis, Braylon Allen. You expect some of those guys to be able to pick up big gains, but unfortunately, wasn't the case. The Jets' running game is continuing to be a problem for them all season long. So, but nonetheless, the Jets were able to get the victory, even with that poor performance from the run game. But yeah, it's wild. Mac Jones, how many rushing yards did he have in this game? 30 yards rushing. Yeah, if you had told me before the game, um, take the over on Aaron Rodgers and Mac Jones in rushing yards, um, we called you crazy. But 30 yards for Mac, 45 yards for Rodgers. Not something you would expect in these kind of games. But yeah, so yeah, the Jets defense again continues to kind of alarm, be alarming week in and week out. I have major concerns in the direction of of that unit. I think that's where you kind of look at this team and say, do they potentially need a defensive minded guy to be their head coach? I still kind of lean to getting a good offensive guy because my thoughts here are it's likely easier to find a good defense coordinator that has kind of shake free and isn't going to get a second opportunity to be your coordinator than it is to find a guy to be your, you know, offensive coordinator. It's probably going to leave in a couple years. Fenner, I appreciate you again in the chat. Yeah, it was very slow motion on the. I don't know how he ended up getting 45 yards. Those running plays were very slow motion. Um, But nonetheless, I mean, he made the plays he had to make. Um, Even lowered his shoulder on that one run. Then ended up getting called for a face mask as well for an additional 15-yard penalty. Um, Listen, Rodgers, the whole Rodgers thing hasn't worked. We all understand that. We're 4-10. We all understand this was supposed to be a much better season than it has been. But the one thing I appreciate about Rodgers, he hasn't quit. You know, he doesn't need to be rushing for first downs and lowering his shoulder and all in all what he's doing. I understand it's the job title of a quarterback. You're supposed to do that. But at 41 years old, he doesn't need to put himself in harm's way, especially after a season where he's been battling through injuries week in and week out. You kind of would like for him to not expose himself in those situations, but he's having fun out there. He's got a smile on his face. I mean, as bad as the season has gone, he's still enjoying himself, and I think that attitude, that mentality, can kind of work its way through the locker room, or at least like you would hope it could. Um, I don't know. I Part of me is, especially with the Jets draft positioning, is just saying, let's give it one more shot if he's willing to be here. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to who the new coach, coordinator, um, and GM is and what their route is. And I don't think that I think you can do far worse than having Rodgers sit in front of a quarterback, whether it's Jordan Travis at this point, because you don't want to reach on a guy like Jalen Milrow in the draft, whether it's getting a guy in the second round that maybe slips a little further in the draft, trading up from the second round. I know that the Jets are kind of limited on draft capital because some of the trades they made this season. But there's a few different ways to go about doing this. If there's a free agent available, I know Sam Darnold is kind of dangling out there, but I can't see a situation where he comes here unless the Jets come in with a Ben Johnson type hire that's willing to come here and work with Sam Darnold. I think that's kind of a bit of a reach, in my opinion, for him to be coming back 2025 and have that kind of redemption story with the team. I don't think that's something that's realistic, but I'd at least make the phone call, say, "Hey, you're interested in coming back?" He's developed finely. You know, you can play the hindsight game over and over and over again. Um, you know, I think it was a situation where the Jets kind of had to move on from Darnold when they did. They were picking top two. I just think they picked the wrong quarterback, and that was my opinion from day one. I thought they should have gotten Justin Fields, but nonetheless, I think we'd be in a similar situation at this point, even if we had picked Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Mac Jones. I feel like and Zach Wilson was the fourth quarterback. Um, no, I know Lamar Jackson is outstanding and all that stuff, but he wasn't being, or no, Lamar Jackson was the Donald year. My bad. Those are the 5 quarterbacks. I don't know if there was another one that got picked later on, maybe that kind of is exceed expectations, but when you're going into the draft, those were the names that were possibilities at number 2. When you look back, could you have said the Jets could have traded back, gotten that package the Dolphins got, and stuck with Sam and built around him? You know, I think you can look back and say that that's something they could have done and probably would be in a lot much better situation today than they are. But nonetheless, I think that, you know, we are where we're at. We're able to build this roster out. It's still a very talented roster. I don't. I think when you look at this team eventually down the road, when all these firings are kind of completed, I think you can look at the Jets and say, they're a well talented roster, probably one of the more talented rosters in this hiring cycle. Um, let's give it a shot. If you're a coordinator that's coming up for a job, if you're one of these veteran like guy like Vrabel, Flores, like here's a good team filled with talent. Just wasn't coached properly. I can get the best out of them. I think the Jets would be a situation that could be appealing for a guy like that. But again, we'll see how that all goes as we kind of proceed down the road. Um, last minute thoughts here on this game. I kind of went through most of it already. But yeah, last little piece here. I know we talked about Sauce a little bit. Again, that game-winning interception, steal out the game. He's a guy who needed that interception. He kind of struggled to get interceptions for the last couple of seasons. I know it's been a daunting issue for him the last couple of years, and to finally get one, maybe it builds towards more because that's an area of the game that we all kind of talk about that needs to be worked on. And it wasn't really an interception that he created. It was an interception that kind of, you know, Mac Jones threw an awful pass. I'm not going to say he really kind of created that. He was just in the right place, right time to basically fair catch and interception is kind of what happened there. But nonetheless, he got his first. Sometimes when you get your first, it leads to a little bit of a streak. Hopefully that's the case for him because, you know, I think he's had a rough year from an overall, you know, criticism standpoint, and rightfully so, whatever it might be. He's still a great corner, and I think that a lot of the flack he gets is based off of his poor tackling, based on the penalties. Um, but it's the NFL. These referees, we all understand, they're going to call even the slightest bit of holding, slightest bit of contact as pass interference. And he's unfortunately not getting the benefit of those calls like he was in the first couple of years. But he's still an outstanding corner. Needs to work on his ball skills. He needs to turn his head around when it looks like a receiver's going for a catch, get his hands up, make the play. That's the area of his game that I think he should really work on, including the tackling, like we mentioned earlier. But credit to him getting his first interception, seal the game. Um, he had comments after the game that this, kind of, you know, was a real moment for him. Felt like draft day type of thing. And some people might say, you beat the Jaguars, so what? But you know what? I don't give a shit about that. This guy's out there fighting his ass off all season long. Any of these players can just mail it in if they really really wanted to. Preserve themselves for the rest of the season. Move forward. Season's a loss, so what the hell am I doing here? All those things could be something that runs through these players' heads. But in his eyes, he's out there, he's having fun, and got a game-winning interception, and it was a surreal moment for him, And I'm not going to criticize a player for being excited for making a game-winning play. That's what these players need to be doing. They need to be excited for winning, whether it's against the Jaguars, whether it's a meaningless game in December. I I understand the people that are pro tank, and I don't fault you for that. But these players are working their asses off every single week. They're practicing, whether it's good practices, bad practices. We all understand kind of the press conferences annoy the hell out of us. I do get that. But Sauce Gardner is a part of the solution, as is Garrett Wilson, as I mentioned earlier. And the guy made a game winning play. And at the end of the day, that's what we want these players to do. We want them to do more of it. The way that you turn into a winner is to win games. You don't go from the first pick to a Super Bowl the following year. It just doesn't happen. So you got to start somewhere with winning games. And maybe all this is like a little blessing in disguise, kind of a turn for better. Or I could be dead wrong. We could be positioning ourselves poorly in the draft and be suffered for the next 10 to 15 years. Who the hell knows? But I'm not going to sit here year in and year out, root for my team to lose, and be criticized for it either. It's a fun game to watch. And unfortunately for us, these Jets have not given us much to be excited about. Well, yesterday they gave us a victory, and we have our second victory Monday of the season. So let's all enjoy it. Let's have a good time. Draft be what it may. There's players that get picked all along the draft board that end up having great careers in the NFL. At the end of the day, it's about picking the right head coach and GM. That's something that this team has control over. You don't have control over where you pick in the draft. You have control over who is leading the charge. And at this point, it's up to Woody Johnson to find the right guy. And do I have faith in that happening? That's a conversation for a different day. We all understand he's had many opportunities to pick the right guy, and in a lot of those situations has failed. So does it continue this offseason? We'll see. History of the Jets, the new head coach will be gone in 3 years. But Detroit was also on that trajectory for a long time, and I understand Dan Campbell is kind of getting some flack for what he did yesterday in a 12-minute game to kick an onside kick, whatever. The guy does what he believes he needs to do to win games. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In most of the cases, it has worked in his career, and that's why the Lions have turned it around and are one of the models of consistency based on their performances the last few years. They made it to the NFC Championship game last year, and up until yesterday's kind of defeat to Buffalo, were being considered as the NFC's front runner to make it to the Super Bowl. So say what you want about Dan Campbell, but he's a leader over there, and the Jets need one of those. How you find it, who knows? Anyway, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate everyone that chats. Tommy, thank you for joining. Veterans Game Podcast. Appreciate you in the chat as well. Everyone, enjoy your week. We don't get many victory Mondays. We don't get very many victory weeks. But enjoy this one. I don't see many more coming the rest of the season, but who knows? Most importantly, let's go Jets.